It all began with a creeping unease, one that gnawed at the edges of my mind like a persistent shadow. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but over time, the signs became impossible to ignore. My younger sister, Sarah, who had always been close to me, started behaving strangely around Tom, my boyfriend. Her glances lingered too long, her laughter rang out too loudly, and her touches seemed calculated rather than casual. During family dinners, she would maneuver herself into the seat next to him, brushing off any suggestion that we switch places with an overly sweet smile. "Oh, let's just stay like this. It's cozier," she'd say, her tone light but her intentions heavy. One evening, as we gathered in the living room to watch a movie, I caught her leaning into Tom under the pretense of sharing his phone screen. Their shoulders touched, and though they laughed about something on the device, the air grew thick with tension. My stomach churned as I watched them from across the room. Was I imagining things? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath her seemingly innocent actions? Every instinct screamed betrayal, yet I fought against the thought, convincing myself that I was overanalyzing harmless interactions. But deep down, doubt festered, poisoning my peace of mind. What if these weren't mere coincidences? And what would happen if I confronted her? The tension between us had been building for weeks, but I finally mustered the courage to confront Tom about Sarah's behavior. It was late at night and we were sitting on the couch in his apartment after a long day. My heart raced as I carefully chose my words, trying not to sound accusatory but desperate for him to understand how much this situation was eating away at me. "Tom," I began hesitantly, "I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me." He looked up from his phone, his expression neutral, though I could sense a flicker of curiosity. "It's about Sarah," I continued, my voice trembling slightly. "I've noticed how she's been acting around you, laughing too loudly at your jokes, finding excuses to touch you, even lingering near you whenever possible. It's making me uncomfortable." As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw his face harden. For a moment, there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then he sighed deeply, leaning back against the couch as if preparing himself for an argument. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone laced with frustration. "You're overthinking things again, aren't you?" "She's just being friendly." "Maybe you should take a break or something, you've been so stressed lately." His dismissive response hit me like a punch to the gut. How could he trivialize what I was feeling? Was he really that blind to her actions, or was he choosing to ignore them? I pressed on, determined to make him see reason. "It's not just friendly, Tom. You didn't see her at dinner last week, giggling like a schoolgirl every time you said anything remotely funny. And today, during the barbecue at my parents' house." My voice faltered as memories of earlier that evening flooded back. I had gone inside to grab drinks, leaving Sarah and Tom chatting by the grill. When I returned, they were standing closer than necessary, their heads bent together as they whispered and laughed softly. The casual brush of her hand against his arm sent a jolt of unease through me, but I forced myself to stay calm for now. "Okay, fine," Tom interrupted, cutting me off mid-thought. "Let's say she was laughing a lot or standing close to me. What do you want me to do about it? Tell her to back off? That would be ridiculous. She's your sister, for God's sake." His voice rose with each word, and I flinched at the sharpness in his tone. Maybe the real issue here is that you're projecting your own insecurities onto everyone else. His accusations stung more than I cared to admit. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "This isn't about insecurity," I shot back, my voice shaking with emotion. "It's about respect for me, for our relationship. But apparently, you don't care enough to even acknowledge that something might be wrong." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice softer, but no less cutting. "Look, maybe the problem isn't Sarah or me, it's you. Have you thought about that? Maybe you're letting work stress or whatever get the better of you." His final remark left me reeling. How could he reduce everything I'd said to mere jealousy or stress? I wanted to scream, to shake him until he understood the depth of my pain. Instead, I stood up abruptly, grabbing my bag and heading for the door. "Forget it," I muttered under my breath. "If you can't see what's right in front of you, then there's no point in talking anymore." As I drove home that night, tears streaming down my face, I couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Tom standing so close in the garden. Their laughter echoed in my mind, mocking me. Every instinct screamed betrayal, yet the person who was supposed to stand by me had turned against me instead. I felt utterly alone. The confrontation I had been dreading finally arrived. After weeks of simmering tension, I decided to meet Sarah at a small cafe near her apartment. My hands trembled as I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the porcelain cup, a sound that seemed deafening in the otherwise quiet space. Sarah, on the other hand, was all smiles, chatting animatedly about her wedding plans as if nothing was wrong. Her carefree demeanor only deepened my unease, but I knew I couldn't delay any longer. "Sarah," I began, my voice tight with suppressed emotion, "we need to talk." She paused mid-sentence, her expression shifting from cheerful to puzzled. "What's wrong?" she asked innocently, tilting her head slightly. Taking a deep breath, I plunged into the heart of the matter. "I've noticed how you've been acting around Tom. You're flirting, the unnecessary touching, the way you look at him. It's making me uncomfortable and it needs to stop." For a moment, there was silence. Then her face transformed. The confusion melted away, replaced by anger. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, her voice rising sharply. "You think I'm flirting with your boyfriend? This is insane." Her laughter followed, brittle and forced, like shards of glass cutting through the air. "Tom is practically family. How could you even accuse me of something so ridiculous?" Her denial hit me like a slap, but I refused to back down. "It's not just family-friendly behavior, Sarah. You're constantly finding excuses to be near him, laughing at everything he says, even when it's not funny, and touching him in ways that are completely inappropriate. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about." Her cheeks flushed red and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Oh, I see what this is about," she hissed, leaning forward across the table. Her voice dripped with venom. "You're jealous. You can't handle seeing me happy while you cling to someone who clearly doesn't appreciate you. Is that it? Are you trying to sabotage my happiness because you're insecure?" "Eich," word felt like a dagger piercing my chest. "This isn't about jealousy or insecurity," I shot back, my own voice trembling with fury. "It's about respect for me, for my relationship, and for the boundaries that should exist between us. But apparently you don't care about any of that." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're unbelievable," she spat, her tone icy. "All these accusations just days before my wedding? Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? You're ruining everything because of your paranoia." Her hands balled into fists at her sides, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out physically. Before I could respond, she grabbed her bag and turned toward the exit. Over her shoulder, she threw one final barb. "Stay out of my life, and don't ever show your face to me again. If you ruin my wedding, I'll never forgive you." With that, she stormed out, leaving me sitting alone at the table, my heart pounding and tears threatening to spill over. As soon as I got home, my phone rang. It was Mom. "What is going on?" she demanded before I could even say hello. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "Sarah called me crying. She says you accused her of horrible things. Right before her wedding? How could you do this to your own sister?" "I didn't make anything up," I protested, my voice cracking under the weight of frustration. "Mom, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand," she interrupted, her tone escalating. "How dare you spread lies and ruin her big day? What kind of person does that? Fix this or don't bother coming home." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in stunned silence. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me. I sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions: anger, betrayal, despair. Everyone had turned against me, convinced I was the villain in this story. But deep down, I knew the truth. And now, more than ever, I realized the cost of standing up for myself. The fallout from the confrontation was swift and merciless. Within hours of my discoveries, Sarah had painted me as the villain in her narrative, spinning a tale of betrayal and paranoia to our parents. By the time I returned home, my phone buzzing incessantly with calls from Mom, Dad, and even distant relatives, I already knew where their loyalties lay. The moment I stepped through the door, the air was thick with tension. My mother's face was red with anger, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "How could you do this?" she demanded before I could even set my bag down. "Right before your sister's wedding? Do you have any idea how selfish you're being?" I tried to explain, my voice trembling as I recounted what I witnessed: the kiss, the embrace, the undeniable truth, but they didn't want to hear it. "You're ruining everything," my father bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. His outburst startled me, but not as much as the coldness in his eyes when he added, "If you can't apologize and fix this mess, then maybe you don't belong here." Their words hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under an ocean of despair. How could they side with her after everything? Didn't they see that I was the one who had been betrayed? But no matter how hard I pleaded, they refused to listen. To them, I was the problem, a jealous, unstable woman trying to sabotage her sister's happiness. The weight of their judgment crushed me, leaving me gasping for breath. That night, after another heated argument, my mother issued an ultimatum. "Either you apologize to Sarah and make things right, or you leave this house." Her tone was final, devoid of any warmth or compassion. I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman who used to comfort me when I was little, but all I saw was a stranger. "Fine," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'll go." Packing a small suitcase with shaking hands, I left the only home I'd ever known. The streets outside felt alien, the world suddenly colder and darker than I remembered. I checked into a dingy hotel room, its peeling wallpaper and faint smell of mildew doing little to ease my misery. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I buried my head in my hands and let the sobs overtake me. Each tear carried the weight of my shattered relationships, my boyfriend, my sister, my parents, all gone in the blink of an eye. As the hours dragged on, the silence of the room pressed against me, suffocating in its intensity. I curled up on the stiff mattress, clutching a pillow to my chest as if it could somehow fill the void inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, abandoned by everyone I had ever loved. The thought of facing tomorrow seemed impossible, yet I knew there was no escape. All I could do was lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had unraveled so completely. The day of the wedding arrived, but I wasn't there to witness it. Instead, I sat alone in my hotel room, staring blankly at the wall as the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from family members who were likely wondering why I hadn't shown up. I ignored them all, unable to face the chaos I knew would unfold. But even in my solitude, the truth found its way to me. It was Emma, my cousin, who called late in the evening. Her voice was a mix of excitement and disbelief as she breathlessly recounted what had happened. "Oh my God, you won't believe this," she began, her tone trembling with urgency. "Mark, he exposed everything at the altar." My heart raced as she described the scene. The church had been filled with guests, their murmurs of anticipation filling the air as Sarah walked down the aisle in her pristine white gown. Mark stood at the altar, calm but distant, his expression unreadable. When it came time for the vows, instead of proceeding as planned, he stepped forward and addressed the crowd. His voice was steady, but the words he spoke sent shockwaves through the entire congregation. "I cannot go through with this wedding," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Sarah. "I've recently learned the truth about Sarah's actions that have betrayed not only her sister, but also destroyed her family's trust. I cannot marry someone who lacks integrity and moral decency." The silence that followed was deafening. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I could almost picture the horrified expressions on everyone's faces. Sarah, standing just a few feet away, turned pale as if all the blood had drained from her body. Her hands trembled violently as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Then, without warning, her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Emma continued, her voice tinged with awe. Your parents, they were furious. They stormed out of the church, yelling something about how you've brought shame to the family. Everyone's in complete shock. As she spoke, I felt a strange mixture of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt vindicated, relieved that the truth had finally come to light. Mark's courage in exposing Sarah's betrayal gave me a sense of justice I hadn't dared to hope for. Yet, another part of me ached deeply. The image of my sister lying lifeless on the floor haunted me, along with the knowledge that my family now blamed me for ruining what should have been the happiest day of her life. Before ending the call, Emma added one final detail that left me reeling. Mark said something else before he walked out, she whispered. He looked directly at your parents and said, I cannot build a future with someone who has proven herself to be so morally bankrupt. Then he turned and left, leaving Sarah sobbing uncontrollably on the ground. Hanging up the phone, I sank back into the chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had transpired. While I was glad the truth had been revealed, the aftermath was devastating. My family's anger burned brighter than ever, and the rift between us seemed insurmountable. I couldn't help but wonder, was revealing the truth worth the cost? In the aftermath of the wedding disaster, my life unraveled completely. The bond I once shared with my family, those warm dinners, laughter-filled evenings, and moments of unconditional support was gone, replaced by a deafening silence. My parents refused to speak to me, blaming me for ruining everything. Sarah avoided me entirely, her betrayal still fresh in my mind every time I thought of her. I was alone, truly alone, in a way I never imagined possible. The days blurred into one another, each more painful than the last. Meals became solitary rituals, eaten in silence while staring at the wall or scrolling through social media just to feel some semblance of connection. Nights were worse. Sleep eluded me as memories of Sarah's laughter, Tom's dismissive words, and Mark's cold declaration haunted my thoughts. Even when exhaustion overtook me, dreams turned into nightmares, where I relived the moment I caught them together, their guilty faces etched permanently in my memory. Trust, something I once took for granted, now felt like an impossible leap. Every smile from strangers seemed insincere, every friendly gesture laced with hidden motives. The idea of starting a new relationship terrified me. What if history repeated itself? What if I opened my heart only to be betrayed again? These questions gnawed at me relentlessly, leaving me paralyzed by fear and self-doubt. One evening, as I sat on the couch staring out the window at the rain-soaked streets, a thought crept into my mind. Could I forgive them? Should I try to rebuild what's been broken? But forgiveness felt so distant, almost unreachable. How could I reconcile with people who refused to see my side of the story? And yet, the alternative, a lifetime of isolation, was equally unbearable. The truth, though finally revealed, came at a devastating cost. I lost my relationship, my family's trust, and the bond I once shared with my sister, all in the name of standing up for what was right. This ordeal taught me the value of trusting my instincts, even when others dismiss them as paranoia or jealousy. I realized that love and loyalty aren't always as uncheckable as they seem. Sometimes the people closest to us can betray us most deeply. Though the truth has set me free from silence, healing is far from over. Rebuilding trust will take time, patience, and courage. Yet amidst the pain, I've grown stronger and wiser. Though the road ahead is long, I told myself, at least now I know how to walk it.